The night. The stars went quiet. The Empire had lasted for 1,000 years, and in all that time the skies had been alive with their ships, their banners and their voices claiming every system as their own. But on this night, the stars above the capital ring were not alive, they were silent. Terran, a young signals officer, sat at his console staring at the empty displays. The defense array that had guarded the system for centuries was dark sector after sector, winked out as though the universe itself was erasing them. He listened to the chatter on the bridge, but it was all confusion. One commander demanded a status report. Another cursed the incompetence of engineers, but no one could explain how an entire fleet of monitors could vanish. Without warning, Terran had grown up believing the Empire was eternal. He believed its fleets were invincible. He had sworn loyalty to the crown without question. But as the minutes dragged on, and every system around the capital fell quiet, he felt that belief cracking in his chest. He tried to run diagnostics on the sensors, but the readouts told him nothing. There was no interference, no energy signature, no approaching ships, nothing at all. And yet everyone knew something was out there. Because whole squadrons stopped reporting and fortress beacons died as if crushed by invisible hands. On the far edge of the system, Admiral Mara Kepler stood aboard the human command ship, the Aegis of Dawn. Her fleet was called the Silent Fleet, for it moved. Without emissions, no broadcasts, no signals. Only the shadow of its intent. Humans had watched the Empire for generations. They had seen the chains of slavery, the cruelty of taxes, the endless wars of conquest, and they had built a weapon not of size, but of silence. Mara knew the moment had come to strike her. Officers reported that the first phase was complete defensive arrays removed. No civilian structures touched every move. Precise, calculated not to terrorize the innocent, but to shatter the myth of the Empire. Back on the capital ring, the Emperor's ministers gathered in panic in their grand hall and demanded answers. Some believed it was rebellion. Others whispered of alien gods returning to punish arrogance. But Terran saw the truth in the cold sweep of the scanners. Nothing natural, nothing divine. It was war, and the enemy was invisible. He felt his throat tighten as he reported that the eastern defense wall was gone, that the fortress moons had ceased transmitting, that the skies were empty, yet something was erasing them. The admiral of the local fleet shouted at him to hold the line, to keep broadcasting loyalty oaths to inspire the citizens. But Terran knew no words could mask the terror that was creeping into every voice. The people in the city below began to notice the silence too. Their children pointed to the night sky and asked why the patrols were not shining their usual trails. Merchants on the docks wondered why the beacon lights were dim. Priests claimed it was a test of faith, but the truth was already racing through whispers. The Empire was being hunted, and no one could see the hunters. Mara stood in the command chamber of her ship and watched the map fill with fallen nodes she carried. No joy in her eyes, only resolve. The humans had chosen this path because diplomacy had failed. Every envoy had been executed, every plea ignored, every resistance crushed. Now silence itself became their language. Her orders were clear. Every strike must avoid civilian population centers. Every target must be military infrastructure only. She repeated this so her captains would remember that the purpose was liberation, not revenge. Terran sat at his console, his hands trembling. He had been taught that fear was weakness, but now he knew fear was truth. He whispered to himself that the Empire could not fall in one night, but with every blink of the status lights he saw it happening. The Empire was crumbling like a sandcastle beneath an unseen tide. He imagined what his sister planetside would think when the sky above her city went dark. He clenched his jaw and swore he would find a way to keep her safe. The night dragged forward, and the silence deepened. Whole fleets were erased without a single explosion visible from the capital ring. No grand battles, no glory, only absence, and in that absence the myth of the eternal Empire cracked across 1,000 worlds. The people would wake to a sky without their masters and to whispers of a name they had long forgotten, the name of humanity, returning not with parades but with shadows. And in that first night of silence, the seeds of fear and hope were sown together across the galaxy, the warning and the refusal as the Empire reeled. In confusion, a single message cut through the silence. It was narrowband, encoded in a frequency that the Imperial systems had not used for centuries, and it carried the voice of Admiral Mara Kepler, calm, steady, and unmistakable. She said, "Surrender. Your slave keys stand down. Your siege stations evacuate your thrall crews. This is your only warning." The message carried no boast, no anger, only a plain demand, and in the council chambers of the Empire. That message was played and replayed until the walls shook with denial. The Grand Council of the Empire sat on thrones carved from the bones of conquered worlds, and they heard the warning as an insult to their pride. To them, surrender was impossible. For 1,000 years they had ruled with terror, and with absolute belief in their own invincibility, they laughed at the human voice, calling it a bluff. They claimed silence meant weakness, and that the attackers had no real strength. One counselor demanded the immediate execution of every human slave within reach. Another ordered the activation of the fortress moons that circled the heart world within minutes. Those moons powered up their massive guns, fed by thrall crews who had no choice but to obey. The Empire believed it was showing strength, but in truth it was placing its hands directly into the jaws of the silent fleet. Mara watched from her command chamber as the fortress moons lit their weapons arrays. Her officers stood tense, but she raised a hand and ordered precision strikes. Within moments, the silent fleet launched a series of kinetic lances invisible to any sensor. The power spines of each moon ruptured with surgical accuracy, and the mighty fortress moons went dark. One after another, the humans had not fired. On the crews, they had not destroyed the moons entirely. They had simply removed their ability to kill. In doing so, they exposed the Empire's reliance on fear rather than strategy. On the capital ring, Terran heard the screams of officers who could not understand how fortress moons that had stood for centuries could be undone in minutes. He tried to maintain his composure, but his thoughts drifted to his sister. Living on the surface below, the council was demanding that civilians remain in their homes, that no evacuation was to be ordered, because the Empire had never shown fear to its subjects. But Terran could feel in his bones that the civilians were in danger, and he could not bear the thought of his sister dying under Imperial arrogance. Terran made a choice that night, one that could cost him his life. He rerouted a narrow signal through maintenance bands hidden from the Council and sent it not to the Empire but to the unknown attackers. He pleaded that civilians were being held back from evacuation, that the Council would rather let its own people burn than admit defeat. He did not know if anyone would hear him, but he prayed that the silent warships had ears as sharp as their weapons. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, Grand Admiral Severin Kale rallied his officers. He thundered that the attackers were cowards hiding in shadows, that the Empire would root them out and crush them. He ordered the deployment of thrall fleets from the outer sectors to the capital. He swore that the Empire would never bow to humans who had once been dismissed as savages. His voice was strong, but his eyes betrayed the first flicker of doubt. For he had seen the reports. He knew the fortress moons had been erased without a single energy spike detected. He knew something beyond his understanding was at work. Mara received Terran's signal in silence. She listened to his trembling voice warning of civilians trapped under Imperial command, and she felt the weight of her choices. She had no desire to slaughter innocents. She wanted to break chains, not bodies, so she adjusted her strategy and ordered humanitarian corridors to be opened wherever possible. She broadcast another message to the Council offering safe passage for non-combatants, but the Empire remained defiant. The Council declared any citizen who sought to flee a traitor punishable by death. As the night deepened, the truth was laid bare for all to see. The Empire had been given a chance to save its people, but its pride was stronger than its reason. The silent fleet moved like shadows, erasing weapons, sparing civilians whenever they could. But the refusal of the Council meant that tragedy was inevitable, and the galaxy watched in silence as the first cracks of rebellion began to stir within the Empire itself. Terran had crossed a line he could never return from, and in doing so, he unknowingly became the bridge between the oppressors and the liberators, the chains we choose to break. When the fortress moons fell and the Council continued to scream defiance, Mara Kepler turned to the second phase of her plan. The silent fleet would not only cut down weapons, it would reach into the Empire's very heart and pull out those who had been shackled to its service. Sergeant Imani Rao stood in the drop chamber of her transport ship, her armor sealed and her breath steady. She had been trained for years for this moment. The order came through simple and sharp insertion onto a slave foundry station: extract thrall crews and prepare them for evacuation. The drop doors opened, and the marines of humanity fell into the night. The foundry was a vast metal labyrinth orbiting a mining world, its corridors lined with heat and smoke, where tens of thousands of enslaved workers lived in squalor and exhaustion. They were forced to maintain the siege lattices that powered the Empire's most terrible weapons. Imani and her squad cut through the outer locks with magnetic clamps and surged inside. The air was thick with the stench of fuel and fear. At first the thralls scattered, believing another overseer squad had come. But when they saw the armor of the humans and the steady hands offering no lash, only guidance, a flicker of hope stirred within them. Among those thralls was a Valari engineer named Sarah, her slender frame bent from years of labor. Her 4 eyes dim with fatigue yet still sharp with intelligence. She had been forced to oversee the maintenance of Lattice, Core's massive engines that drew power from neural imprints of entire species. The Empire had found a way to harvest the thoughts of its victims and bind them into machines that could predict battle outcomes and guide weapons with terrifying accuracy. Sarah had hated every moment of her work, but she had no choice until the day strangers from a distant world arrived and shattered the locks on her prison. Imani met Sarah in the heart of the foundry, where the lattice core pulsed like a living organ. Sarah told her what it truly was, a machine that fed on the minds of the conquered. She showed the Marines the rows of databanks, each holding the echoes of destroyed cultures. She said the Empire had promised to keep her family alive if she obeyed, but she had long ago stopped believing their lies. Imani listened and felt her stomach twist in anger. She swore to Sarah that humanity would never ask her to build chains again. Instead, she asked her to help dismantle them. Together they worked quickly, alarms blaring through the corridors. Overseer patrols began to converge. Imani ordered her squad to hold them back while she and Sarah rerouted the lattice output to overload the machine without destroying the databanks. The goal was not to erase history but to free it. When the overload struck, the lattice core cracked and the glow faded. Thousands of enslaved workers felt the sudden release in their own minds, as though chains they had never known they carried had been lifted. But the victory came at a cost. Imperial reinforcements surged into the foundry armed with shock weapons designed to cow slaves into submission. Imani fought with brutal determination, her Marines taking wounds but refusing to fall. She called for evacuation, but the nearest window was closing fast. Transports could not risk exposure for long. Mara Kepler herself ordered a shift of fleet formation, risking the revelation of one human warship silhouette to keep the corridor open. The risk was enormous, for the Empire would now have a glimpse of its enemy. Yet Mara decided it was worth it. Thousands of innocents could not be left to die. The evacuation was chaos. Yet it carried the beauty of liberation. Thralls, who had never dreamed of leaving the foundry, felt fresh air on their faces as they boarded transports. Sarah clutched the data core that carried the memories of her people and swore to protect it. Imani bled from a cut across her shoulder, but she smiled because she had seen the eyes of the freed children shining with hope that no overseer could extinguish. When the silent fleet pulled away, the Empire responded with fury. The Council ordered scorched earth protocols across frontier systems. They would rather burn entire worlds than allow them to fall into human hands. Entire settlements vanished in firestorms broadcast across the Empire as a warning. But the effect was the opposite. Instead of cowing the subjects, it lit rebellion in their hearts. They saw the Empire's cruelty, naked and unmasked, and they whispered that the humans who fought in silence might truly be their saviors. For Terran on the Capital Ring, the reports from the frontier confirmed what he had begun to suspect: the Empire would sacrifice anyone to preserve its pride. He thought of his sister again and of the people who could not run, and he clenched his fists because he knew the chains he had sworn to protect were the same chains crushing the life from his family and his world. And in the darkness of his console, he swore quietly that if the silent warships came again, he would help them however he could. The Heart Engine. The silent fleet had carved holes into the Empire's defenses and freed countless thralls. But Mara Kepler knew that unless the true core of Imperial power was broken, the Empire would simply regrow like a severed serpent head. Intelligence from both Sarah and the quiet transmissions of Terran pointed toward a secret vault beneath the Imperial Palace. It was called the Heart Engine, whispered in half-remembered tales by slaves and feared even by the high commanders. The Heart Engine was said to be the brain that kept the Empire alive. a vast machine that balanced taxes, troop movements, propaganda networks, and genocidal decrees. It had run without pause for centuries, giving the rulers their aura of perfection and inevitability. Mara gathered her captains and laid out the plan. The fleet could continue to dismantle weapons, but unless the heart engine was seized, the Empire could regroup in weeks. It had to be done quietly and quickly before the Council realized the humans understood its existence. She ordered a joint team of human marines and newly freed Valari to infiltrate the palace through a maintenance aquifer that fed into the Undercity. Terran had risked his life by transmitting hidden schematics of the palace networks. He knew discovery would mean execution, but he did it anyway because he could not stomach watching his sister perish under Lizamani. Rao volunteered to lead the strike team. Her shoulder was still bandaged from the Foundry battle, but her spirit burned hotter than ever. Sarah joined her, carrying a portable node designed to interface with the lattice cores she had once maintained. Together with a dozen Marines, they slipped into the aquifer waters that smelled of rust and rot, crawling for hours beneath the foundations of the Empire. Above them, palaces of gold and marble shone in arrogance, while beneath them they crawled, through filth, toward the machine that ruled them all. When they emerged inside the vault, the team froze. Rows of cylinders stretched into the darkness. Each one humming with cold light. Within them floated images, minds preserved like insects in amber, stolen from 1,000 conquered cultures. The heart engine did not simply compute by algorithms. It consumed the consciousness of those the Empire had destroyed, bending their thoughts into predictions and decisions. Imani clenched her fists as she saw the frozen face of a child suspended in the glow. Sarah whispered that these were the true cost of the Empire, not the fleets or the armies, but the theft of souls themselves. At the center of the vault, the heart engine pulsed like a sun of wires and crystal, its rhythm steady and merciless. It was aware of them. Its drones began to stir, metal guardians rising from alcoves, their eyes red with command. Programming, the Marines opened fire, their rifles chewing through steel. But more came. In endless waves, Imani roared orders to hold the line, while Sarah connected her node to the lattice strands, her hands shaking. She explained that destroying the heart engine outright would collapse food grids and life support across 1,000 worlds, killing billions, but leaving it intact meant the Empire could rebuild it. Mara had ordered them to find a third way. Sarah wept as she worked her claws, tapping across keys. She reprogrammed the flows to release the stored minds back into the currents of the network. Each liberated mind was like a spark exploding across the systems. The predictive algorithms faltered, then crashed. Entire subroutines shorted out as the heart engine screamed in distortion for the first time in centuries. The Empire's flawless logic cracked into chaos. The drones went still. Their programming shredded the vault, filled with silence broken only by the sobs of Sarah as she collapsed against the core. Imani pulled her up and told her she had done more for the galaxy in that moment than any soldier could ever dream of. The Marines began planting charges, not to destroy, but to seal the vault forever. The heart engine was no more. Its stolen minds set free to echo across the galaxy like voices finally given back their tongues. In the palace above, the Council felt the shift. They shouted at one another, demanding explanations. Their schedules broke, their tax systems jammed, their fleet orders contradicted themselves for the first time in a millennium. The Empire had no perfect brain to guide it. It was suddenly only a collection of frightened men and women sitting on thrones with no future. For Mara, aboard the Aegis of Dawn, the report came with a still image of the vault in ruin. She allowed herself the faintest breath of relief, but also a shadow of dread, because she knew the Empire would not surrender. It would lash out harder than ever, and she would need to be ready to catch the strike before it burned worlds apart. Night Crown failsafe. The destruction of the heart engine should have ended the Empire in truth. Its collapse sent shockwaves through the command ranks. Entire fleets froze mid-course, propaganda systems failed. Governors reported riots, and the Grand Council itself fell into chaos. Yet even with their perfect brain destroyed, they were not finished. Grand Admiral Severin Kyle stood within the palace command chamber and activated a final failsafe that only a handful of rulers had ever known. It was called the Night Crown, a weapon forged in secrecy at the Empire's dawn, designed to ensure that if the capital fell, the entire star would die. The Night Crown was hidden within the palace ring, its machinery woven into what seemed like ceremonial structures, but at Kale's command the ring began to shift, vast segments sliding into new positions glowing with terrible energy. The device was meant to transform the capital star into a stellar spear that would burst outward and annihilate the system it was, a threat not only to the humans who besieged them, but to the billions of civilians on the surface below. Kale broadcast a message across the Empire claiming the humans intended to enslave and consume their worlds. He declared that only by triggering the crown could they preserve their honor. His words were full of fire, but many who heard them felt only dread. Mara Kepler watched the readings with cold fury. Her fleet officers reported energy levels climbing far beyond anything the Empire had ever fielded. She understood instantly what it meant, and knew that one wrong strike could ignite the star itself. The silent fleet had been built to destroy fleets and fortresses, not to contain stellar weapons. She considered ordering a retreat, but she saw the faces of the civilians trapped below, and the thought of abandoning them was unthinkable. She demanded solutions from her officers and from Sarah, who had joined her aboard the command deck. Sarah studied the harmonics of the Night Crown and realized it functioned on lattice principles, the same she had been forced to maintain in the foundries. If the resonance could be disrupted, the chain reaction could be slowed or even reversed, but the calculations were impossibly complex and would require constant adjustments under fire. She told Mara she could guide them, but only if someone inside the palace ring could relay corrections through the Imperial channels. Mara hesitated, but then remembered Terran, the young signals officer, whose transmissions had already saved lives. She ordered. A secure line opened. Terran was in the middle of chaos on the capital ring. Officers screaming around him, civilians rioting in the streets below. Yet when the silent voice of the humans reached him asking for help, he answered without pause. He knew that to aid them was treason punishable by death, but he also knew his sister was among the billions who would die if the Night Crown fired. He tapped into the hidden channels and began feeding resonance data to Sarah. His voice shaking but his hands steady. For the first time he felt that he was doing something worthy. Not for the Empire, but for life itself. Imani Rao and her Marines were already deployed within the outer corridors of the palace ring. Their mission had been to cut relay towers, but now they were given a new order. Buy time while Sarah and Terran aligned the resonance. She led her team into brutal close quarters, fighting against elite guards who had sworn to die with. The Empire blades clashed. Rifles fired, sparks rained across marble halls. Imani fought with a ferocity that startled even her enemies. Every second she gained was another moment for the calculations to align as the Night Crown charged its glow spread. Across the sky, visible even from the ground, entire cities looked upward at a halo of fire that threatened to consume them. Priests chanted that the gods had returned. Merchants clutched their families in despair. Yet in the silence between heartbeats, human warships maneuvered unseen, weaving into position to prepare for what might be the most dangerous interception in history. The energy rose higher every moment, the fail-safe drawing closer to critical. Terran's voice grew hoarse as he relayed. The shifting resonance, Sarah's claws blurred across the console, adjusting frequencies. Imani bled from wounds but still drove her team forward. Mara stood calm at the center of her bridge, though her heart thundered within her chest. She knew the Empire had placed the galaxy on a knife edge, and that the slightest misstep would mean the end of everything. The Night Crown hummed like a dying sun reaching for release, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the Empire itself trembled, not from fear of outside power, but from the realization that their leaders would burn them all rather than surrender. The choice before the galaxy was clear. Stand with those who fought for chains or with those who risked everything to break them. The stage was set for silence to roar. The shattering silence. The Night Crown's hum reached a crescendo across the palace ring, its lights spilling into space like molten gold. Human warships edged closer, invisible against the backdrop of chaos. Mara Kepler studied the displays, her eyes scanning every fluctuation in energy resonance. She knew that one misstep from Sarah or Terran could trigger a chain reaction that would destroy the system below. Yet retreat was not an option. The civilians on the planets and moons would die if she faltered. Every calculation depended on the perfect harmony of human precision and Valari insight. Imani Rao led her Marines through the inner corridors of the palace. The guards fought with the desperation of those who believed death was better than surrender. Every hallway echoed with the clash of steel and the boom of pulse rifles. Her team moved like shadows, striking swiftly and retreating faster, buying precious seconds for Sarah, who danced across the consoles aboard the Aegis of Dawn, her mind a blur of calculations adjusting frequency and resonance waves. She whispered to herself, the voices of thousands of freed minds echoing in her head, guiding her hands, telling her where to push and pull, where to bend the energy without breaking the lattice. Terran's fingers flew across his terminal in the Imperial Command Center, transmitting corrections through hidden subroutines. Every burst of data was a gamble. Each packet could be intercepted, yet he risked everything to save those he could not see. Each correction echoed across the silent fleet waves of energy, bending and twisting in response. The Night Crown quivered as though it sensed the opposition for the first time. Its perfect faltered, sending tremors across the capital ring. Below the palace, millions looked up at the sky, the gold light painting their cities with a brilliance that promised death. Yet Mara's voice cut across the channels, broadcasting only to the humans in the fleet, "Stay with me, every adjustment matters, every second counts." She spoke calmly yet firmly, knowing that discipline under fear was the only thing that could save billions. Imani's team reached the final relay tower, the one that fed the Crown's stabilizers, and with synchronized precision, she and her Marines destroyed the energy conduits, replacing them with human overrides, wires sparking as they rerouted power. The hum of the Night Crown faltered once more. Sarah's node pulsed bright in her hands. She tapped the lattice cores and the resonance began to warp, twisting the flows of energy away from the core channels. Terran adjusted the transmissions with nerves of steel, coordinating each shift across systems. The Night Crown shuddered violently, warning lights blazing across the palace ring. And yet the human team held the line. They were relentless, every fallen Marine replaced by another, pulling back only when it was safe to regroup and push forward again. Imani's voice echoed through comms. "You will not take this world. We fight for every soul trapped under tyranny." The Empire's elite guards began to panic. The system they had relied upon for 1,000 years to guarantee their supremacy now betrayed them. The Night Crown's energy flared uncontrollably. The ring trembled, steel twisted glass, shattered alarms screamed. But the humans were unyielding, the combination of courage and precision, bending the unstoppable toward control every second. A life saved every shift, a system stabilized. Mara Kepler felt the weight of the galaxy in her chest. She pushed forward, every calculation screaming through her mind, ensuring that nothing broke the balance. Finally, the resonance reached a tipping point. Sarah held her breath. The freed minds in her node pulsed as though urging the lattice to stabilize. Terran sent the final burst of data, and the Night Crown froze in place, its energy suspended like captured lightning. The palace ring quaked as systems reset, alarms dying in sudden silence. The humans had bent a stellar weapon designed to erase worlds into stasis. A frozen threat waiting for dismantling. The Empire had been humiliated, yet alive enough to retreat. Its plans shattered, its pride in ruins. Imani Rao lowered her rifle. Her team battered but unbroken, she looked at the horizon of the palace ring and knew that the battle was not over yet. The Empire still had its fleets and its ambitions. But for the first time in centuries, humanity had shown it could reach into the very heart of the galaxy and not only survive but bend impossibility to their will. Mara allowed herself a fleeting moment of pride, but knew that the final confrontation was near. The silent fleet would not rest until the Empire itself was silenced completely and the galaxy truly free. Empire falls. Humanity prevails. The remnants of the Night Crown lay inert like a wounded beast. The palace ring smoldering from the relentless human assault above and below. Mara Kepler watched as the fleets of the Empire tried to regroup, but without their heart engine and with the Night Crown neutralized, their movements were disjointed. Chaos ran through their ranks like wildfire, each flagship moving on instinct rather than order. The silent fleet seized the advantage, striking first at the scattered command vessels, obliterating their weapon platforms before the Empire could react. The stars themselves seemed to tremble as human ships carved through the darkness like blades made of light. Imani Rao led her Marines across the shattered corridors of the palace ring, the remnants of the Imperial Guard fighting desperately but without coordination. They were like insects swarming against a storm. Her team moved with lethal precision, each encounter leaving the halls silent, yet still the threat of the night crown lingered in their minds. Every misstep could awaken the dormant weapon. Yet Sarah and Taryn's interventions ensured that the lattice remained stabilized, their combined skill holding a device designed to destroy worlds and check humanity had become the unexpected master of technology. It had never intended to command. Mara's eyes scanned the display as intelligence reports streamed in. The Empire's colonies were cutting communications. The governors fled in panic or were arrested by loyalists, yet their fleet scattered across space had no command structure and were being picked off one by one. Humans moved in coordination, the silent fleet striking simultaneously from multiple directions, leaving no room for counterattack. It was a symphony of precision and ruthlessness that left the galaxy reeling. The Empire, which had ruled for 1,000 years, found itself paralyzed by the audacity of a species it had deemed inferior within. The Central Palace Chamber Grand Admiral Kale stood facing Mara's forces in holographic communication. He had always believed himself untouchable. The Heart Engine and the Night Crown had made him a god among men. Yet the humans had shown that calculation alone could not predict courage, the unexpected, the willingness to act against impossible odds. Kale's voice was low as he issued commands that went unheard. The Empire's centuries of training crumbled beneath the relentless tide of human ingenuity and determination. Imani's team reached the final chamber, the central throne of the Council itself. It was here that the symbolic end would come. She planted charges not to destroy but to secure the palace against any future resurgence. The human fleet maintained orbital dominance, preventing any escape or reinforcements. The Emperor's advisors were taken into custody, their arrogance broken, their pride shattered, and the citizens watching through comm channels felt hope bloom for the first time in generations. A species long underestimated had finally bent the galaxy to its will, not through domination, but through courage and the refusal to accept tyranny. Sarah worked rapidly to extract the remaining data cores from the Heart Engine. The stolen consciousness of countless worlds now liberated, their voices echoing faintly across her node, whispering thanks and relief. Each liberated mind a testament to the cost of empire and the value of humanity's intervention. Taryn guided her through the transmissions, ensuring that the freed intelligence would reach safe systems across the stars, giving them knowledge lost for centuries. The human victory was not just of steel and fire, but of compassion, intelligence, and foresight. The galaxy would remember this night for millennia. Mara allowed herself the first moment of quiet reflection as she stood on the bridge of the Aegis of Dawn. The stars stretched endlessly before her, and she knew the Empire was broken, not just physically but spiritually, its foundations destroyed by those it had never taken seriously. Humanity had shown that silence could roar, and that even the greatest empires could fall in a single night if the right hand struck with precision and courage. The galaxy was free to breathe again, the future no longer dictated by fear, but by those who dared to act. As the final communication came from the liberated colonies, Mara issued the command to stand down. The silent fleet gathered together. For the first time in decades, a formation of triumph and resolve. The Empire had been shattered, the galaxy's chains broken, and humanity had claimed not conquest, but respect, a warning to all who would underestimate it in the centuries to come. No ruler would dare assume humans were weak, for they had witnessed the night when silence became a weapon, when courage became unstoppable, and when humanity emerged not just alive, but victorious. Humanity's silent roar. The galaxy was quiet, yet the silence was deafening. It carried the weight of 1,000 years of fear and tyranny. It stretched across the stars like a river of light. Human warships hovered in formation around the shattered palace ring, their sleek hulls gleaming against the backdrop of exploding fire and drifting debris. Mara Kepler stood at the bridge of the Aegis of Dawn, her eyes tracing the remnants of the Empire's once mighty fleets, every fallen flagship a testament to human audacity and precision, every city below untouched yet alive, a proof of calculated mercy. She felt the pulse of victory deep within her chest, yet she knew that victory was not a gift. It had been earned with courage and blood. Imani Rao's Marines moved through the palace corridors, like shadows of inevitability. Every step measured, every strike purposeful. They were the silent guardians of the future, their eyes scanning for traps and hidden threats, their hearts steady despite the chaos around them. The Empire's guards who survived were disarmed and stunned. They had witnessed a force that no strategy could contain. No centuries of training could predict humanity had come not to conquer, but to rewrite the rules of power itself. The Night Crown lay dormant beneath the central chamber, its energy subdued by human ingenuity. Its threat contained for now. Yet the story of its attempted fury would echo across the galaxy as a warning. Sierra and Terran worked in tandem, extracting data and stabilizing the lattice. The liberated intelligence of thousands of systems flowed through human networks, whispers of worlds saved and knowledge preserved, a testament to humanity's foresight and adaptability. Sarah's hands moved like fire across the consoles, her mind bending complex calculations into elegant solutions. She was no longer just a strategist, she was the bridge between possibility and reality. Terran's fingers flew over subroutines, guiding the flow of information and ensuring that what had been enslaved could now flourish, each keystroke a declaration that humanity would not be underestimated ever again. The stars themselves seemed to bend in response to human will. The silence that had been the Empire's shield now became the battlefield where humanity's courage roared. It was a night without equal, a night when the impossible had been made reality, when empires built for a millennium fell to those they believed weak. The citizens of countless worlds looked up and wept in relief, knowing that the human fleet had protected them, that the fire above did not burn them, that the silent warriors had chosen life over fear and bravery over submission. Mara Kepler allowed herself a rare smile, her heart heavy with the memories of those lost, yet soaring with the promise of the future. As the Aegis of Dawn moved forward through the wreckage, the remaining Empire forces scattered in confusion and despair. The Grand Admiral Kale fled into the void, his plans shattered, his control evaporated. He understood for the first time that the galaxy would never again bow to threats alone, and that humanity had redefined power, not by domination, but by courage, skill, and unyielding resolve. The silent fleet had become legend before its return home. The echo of its actions would ripple through time, warning all that humans were not to be underestimated. The very fabric of galactic history had shifted in a single night. The citizens on the ground cheered, their voices rising in unison, carrying. Across communication channels, the humans had given them freedom, hope, and a reason to believe once more. The stars twinkled with a quiet brilliance, as if acknowledging that a new era had begun, one defined not by fear, but by audacity and resilience. The humans who had fought were exhausted yet alive, their resolve unbroken. They had faced an empire that spanned 1,000 years and shattered it with nothing but skill, courage, and the will to survive. Mara Kepler stood tall, her eyes reflecting the countless stars around her, knowing that humanity had finally claimed its place among them all, and that no force could silence their spirit again. The end.